Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, and welcome to everyone. I'm going to be bilingual for a start so that all those who are listening in on the various YouTube channels as well as live on Zoom will feel welcome. Ji ਆਇਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਜੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਬੈਠੇ ਹੋ ਅੱਜ ਇਸ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਜ਼ੂਮ ਰਾਹੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਨੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਅਨੁਸਾਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਲਾਹਾ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਾਓਗੇ. I'm sitting in right now as in place of the chair of the all-party parliamentary group for British Sikhs, because Panji Preet Kaur Gill is on her feet voting in Parliament and should be with us within the next 15 minutes or so. Mera naam hai Manjinder Pal Kaur. I'm the International Legal Director of United Sikhs. And by way of introduction, main kehna chahndi haan that when Gurmeet Kaur, the author of the book, the valiant Jaswant Singh Khalra, approached me and said that I have now written the book. The duty is yours to make sure the young in the world know what Jaswant Singh Khalra did and to continue their work. And this was in the middle of COVID, where everyone is not able to meet each other. I'm happy to tell you that Preet Kaur Gill has joined us now, and perhaps Preet, you want to take over from the welcoming duties that you had assigned me whilst you were away, and then I'll jump in again.
Thank you so much, Manjinder Pal Kaur. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Wonderful to see so many people on the call. We will be joined by MPs, and Tanmanjit Singh Desi has also joined us on this call. Can I just also say we've literally been voting, and we are due to have another vote at 7 or after 7, at which point I am going to, prior to that, pass the co-chair to Manjinder Pal Kaur. But I just want to say a few words really and just give you a brief introduction of today's event. Firstly, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining. Can I ask you to put your... Can we mute? Can you... Okay, that's great. I think the host has managed to mute everybody, which is great. I just want to say on behalf of the all-party parliamentary group for British Sikhs, we are a cross-party group of MPs. Lord Ranbir Suri has also joined us. He is a member of our APPG and officer. And we are really honoured to be, hosting this memorial event on Jaswant Singh Khalra. And the all-party parliamentary groups takes up issues which are really important to the diaspora community, and of course the very fact that we are still seeking justice from 1984 is something that diaspora community members here feel very strongly about, and of course we want to see the international recognition of 1984 as a genocide, and until recently that hasn't really been the case, and there is a lot more work that we need to do in terms of the United Nations, but also our respective countries in terms of that recognition of 1984 being classed as what it was, is a genocide. But for me, many like me who watched Jaswant Singh Khalra's very famous speech in Canada, I think it would have moved so many people and inspired so many people. And I was one of those young girls really that was inspired. It just so happens though that when Jaswant Singh Khalra was visiting Canada and the United Kingdom, I was actually in Delhi visiting the Widows' Colony. And I didn't know that at the time, that that's the time of his speech. And so when I was visiting those mothers in the Widows' Colony, it was 10 years after 84, the very message that they were giving to me and sharing with me, something that left me for a very long time and made me interested in human rights, is that the world had forgotten them. And actually there was very few people in India at the time, human rights organizations, Jaswant Singh Khalra was one of them, Fulka has been one of them, and many others that took on the plight and went to seek justice for so many of those families. And actually what Jaswant Singh Khalra unearthed was just shocking. And I'm really pleased that people like Satpal Singh Bains, who's also on this call that will be delivering the lecture, have actually taken on his work, as has his family, his wife, his daughter, who's also joined us on this call. We're very grateful to have you with us. But the work that they have been doing and seeing them really at the forefront has been just so inspiring, and I know it will inspire future generations to come. I want all people to know about who Jaswant Singh Khalra was. There is still so much work that we need to be doing to educate our young children, our future generations, so they absolutely understand that the very fact that Sikhs haven't had the privilege of the freedom of religion or belief in their very home country in India. And I want to see freedom of religion and belief as the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on FORB, actually. It's something that I'm very, very passionate about, as well as within my shadow brief. And I'm really delighted that we've been joined by the UN Special Rapporteur, Ahmed Singh Shahid, on FORB, who's joined us. So just very quickly reiterate that today we're also going to see the launch of the book this is the wonderful book by Gurmeet Kaur, which I had delivered today, and I haven't had a chance to read, but I'm really delighted. I've got books here for MPs that have joined this call, so that they will get their own copy. So really delighted that Gurmeet Kaur is going to speak to us and tell us about what inspired her to write the book. And then we've got Navkiran Kaur, who's joined us from California. She's just Khalra's daughter, and she will deliver a vote of thanks. We've also been joined by Rajinder Singh, who lives in the UK. He is Jaswant Singh Khalra's brother, so great welcome to him. And as I said, there are many MPs and Lords that will be joining us throughout this event. Of course, there is a vote in the House of Commons at the moment as well. But I want to thank everybody that's watching this event through KTV satellite channel, YouTube channels of United Sikhs, Khalas TV and Basics of Sikhi, and Facebook Live from BOSS. And I want to thank the organisers, especially Manjinder Pal Kaur from United Sikhs, BOSS, Sikh PA, who's the media partner, and CAP Freedom of Conscience that has supported the event. So I now want to hand over to my co-chair, Manjinder Pal Kaur. She's a human rights lawyer, a former journalist who serves minorities and the underprivileged as the International Legal Director of United Sikhs. She began work on a rural project called PASS, which is Punjab After School Study, which serves 2,000 government primary school students in 33 villages. And Manjinder Pal divides her time between Punjab, the UK and Malaysia. So over to you, Manjinder Pal.
Hanji Waiguru, I'm back here. I would like to say that I am where I am. There's a dog barking outside, so if I have to mute myself, it's for that reason. So जिस तरह आपने सुनिया है कि जो Penji Preet Kaur Gill ने तो introduction दी है as to why we are here at this meeting. So before I introduce you to our guest speaker, who is Mr. Amit Shahid of the United Nations mandate as a special rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, I would like to briefly tell you who he is. What I liked about a statement he made in 2018 was when he said, national security is no excuse for limiting freedom of religion. That was a speech made at a time, and the time still continues, where, as we've seen in Austria a day ago, we've got elections in the US today. I don't know what the progress is. And various people are in a state of strife. We're also in a state of strife because of COVID. And whilst COVID is a health issue and not a security issue, they are interlinked because of all the unrest and difficulties communities are feeling with social distancing. So when Mr. Shahid made that statement, and I had to quote him when I was trying to bring the case of the Afghan Sikhs in the UN, in the United Nations Human Rights Council, I felt I had the best support because as the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, Mr. Shahid presents the findings of his mandate to the the United Nations General Assembly, I believe at least once a year, if not twice. And Mr. Shahid will no doubt tell us today about the report which is now pending to be published to the United Nations and the roles that he has played in making sure that we get a good idea of what are the issues around the globe when it comes to not only people who are in the minority and minority religions, but people who may be in the majority, but having a minority view about the majority. So Without further ado, Mr. Shahid, who is a politician from the Maldives, which is well known to most people because it's a beautiful country where people visit to feel good. Today, I would like to introduce you a man who has been very robust about his role to bring the issues of religious freedom, religion and belief freedom, to the fore. Simply because usually when there is unrest, the first thing that happens is people of religion have to suddenly defend themselves because they are deemed to be people who have a view and have a belief, and therefore that might conflict with the prevailing conditions at the time of the conflict. Mr. Shahid, if we could ask you to look at the position in South Asia, where Jaswant Singh Khalra worked for years and collated 25,000 missing persons who later were presumed dead, and some of them, the families are still waiting, and this is 36 years and more on. What do we do with a people who are faced with such disappearances when they feel that they were put in that position because of their faith and their religion? And I like you to make the connection that the strife that was experienced by the Sikh community in Punjab in the 80s and 90s was because of their desire to have their freedom of practicing their religion in Punjab, which was connected with the use of the language, the transmission of Gurbani from the Sanctum Sanctorum, which is the golden temple known to all, and how that was the subject matter of a strife. And it is because of their determination, of their wanting to have their freedom to religion, freedom of religion, that they were then targeted. And as we will hear from those who are going to be speaking about Jaswant Singh Khalra, from Satnam Singh Bands, how young people particularly, and even sometimes children and wives and mothers were picked up and never appeared again. And these are the disappearances we'll be talking about today. So Mr. Shahid, if we may ask you to tell us, what do you think the Sikh diaspora at this point, as well as the people in the Punjab, can do about the fact that until today that we have not had the justice that was supposed to be due to the families who have lost their loved ones for many, many years. I now put the duty to talk about it to you, Mr. Shahid. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear co-host, for that offer to me. I have very specific suggestions on that particular point. Before I come to that, I want to begin by stating what an honor it is for me to join such a distinguished lineup of speakers today. And I think all of you are torchbearers in the best sense of the word. And it's a real privilege to be speaking to you this evening. It is really important that we also use solemn occasions like this to honor the memory of Jaswant Singh Khalra and of others like him who have done such sterling work to ensure that rights of everyone are protected, that democracy is strengthened, and that the voiceless don't go voiceless, that they are spoken up for by people who care. I also want to spend a moment to pay tribute to his memory, to honor his memory, to remember his work, and join all of you this afternoon doing that. As all of us know, he was cruelly kidnapped in 1995 while he was investigating extrajudicial killings of Sikh activists in Punjab. His work was instrumental in documenting vital evidence with regard to about 25,000 deaths of Sikhs at the hands of the authorities. And of course, seeking to end impunity for those atrocities is vital, and he repeatedly petitioned Indian courts on behalf of the families and loved ones to get them justice. And the key lesson we take away from his work is the importance of that, how that inspires other people, and how that is so important for those who have been denied justice, despite the passage of years, to keep on pursuing that. The rights of the individual belonging to an ethnic, religious, or linguistic minority, such as members of the Sikh community in many places around the world, are enshrined in international human rights framework with strong protections. Article 27 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, if you like, the keystone of the human rights framework, as well as the UN Declaration on the Rights of Persons belonging to national, ethnic, or religious minorities, one of the most detailed documents outlining what states must do to protect the rights of minorities, provide these standards and guidance for states in how they should respect, protect, and promote rights of minorities. Of course, there are also very strong protections woven through the entire rights framework on rights to equality and non-discrimination of all persons, which apply, of course, therefore, to minorities as well. In addition to promoting the right to respect, protect, and promote rights of minorities, states must ensure that minorities can take part in decision-making about not just about their own lives, but about the state they're in, and of course to enjoy their own culture, to profess and practice their own religion, and of course to use their language. And as you referred, co-chair, that the Sikh community throughout the world has faced restrictions, including in the name of, if you like, security, in the way governments have intruded into core elements of Sikh identity as part of that process of pursuing security. Of course, therefore, implementing these measures requires states to take clear legal provisions and, of course, policies to support that. And linked to that, of course, is Article 18 of the ICCPR, which you referred to, the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion or belief of all persons, regardless of whether or not they are in a majority or in a minority. And we see throughout the world that when states respect this right, in the high level of respect for freedom of thought, conscience, and religion or belief, such communities thrive. They have much better, if you like, political stability, economic prosperity, social, cultural flourishing. And of course, each member of society also feels safer and more empowered when there is strong respect for this right. By contrast, and as we see in many parts in South Asia at the moment, when there is suppression of these rights, they are accompanied by further strife, further violence, more extremism, more inequality, and more despair and deprivation. So there's a clear reason, even from a pragmatic perspective, respect everyone's right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion or belief. Despite this clear message, which has been shown by empirical evidence, huge gap exists between respecting these standards and the aspirations for these. So as UN Special Rapporteur, I identify and respond to existing and emerging threats to freedom of belief around the world, often with an acute focus on rights of persons belonging to these ethnic minorities. You mentioned, you referred to my upcoming reports, and I have two, if you like, on the drawing board. One will be September next year, because this November, we will mark the 40th anniversary of the UN's Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and of Discrimination Based on Religion or Belief, the most detailed document that exists in terms of what rights state ought to protect for religious minorities. And I think for the Sikh community, there are key elements in this document that needs to be protected. And I call upon you to look at this document and to use it as a way to lobby for your rights. I shall be doing a report on this one year's time, look at how states have respected this right. And in South Asia, and as well as neighbors to the East and West, the violations are rising. And I'd be very keen to hear from the Sikh community the ways in which my mandate and my fellow rapporteurs, right, rapporteur on minority rights, rapporteur on transitional justice, can be helpful in upholding your rights. And one common, if you like, challenge we face in South Asia, and again in many parts of the world, is impunity. Not only are states directly violating rights of communities like the Sikh community, but also they are responsible for impunity when other actors harm them. And this toxic cycle spirals into more violence. We see that in Punjab, the thousands of extrajudicial killings that occurred many years ago still remain, if you like, unanswered to. And I think the impunity for perpetrators is one of key drivers of future, if you like, future violations as well. So it's not just the Sikh community that face this challenge of impunity. Like I said, in South Asia, other minorities face this. And even today in India, the situation hasn't really improved. And we see to India's or South Asia's west, in Iran, what's going on, and Afghanistan as well. And to its east, can go up as far as China and North Korea, to see how these rights are being violated. So impunity and state repression are, if you like, challenges for all communities everywhere, especially when they appear as minority communities. And of course, even when they're a majority, if a state is repressive, the state is intolerant, nobody escapes if you like, the long arm of the repressive law, as it were. And as you referred to in the COVID-19 pandemic, everywhere, minorities have been further targeted. It's been a stress test which has brought out the worst in most states. Again, society as well as governments are discriminating against minorities. The question is, what must we do or can we do? I want to remind everybody that last year, the UN adopted August 22nd as International Day to commemorate victims of acts of violence based on religion or belief. The word victims, unfortunately, I'd like to call it survivors or torchbearers, as we have been using this evening, but nonetheless, the word is victims. So the point I'm making is that this is a day that we can all, use to highlight, if you like, those awaiting justice for the violations of their rights. And I call upon Sikh community to work with me and others for next year's event to make sure that we make a higher pitch for justice for victims of violations of rights from years past. And what is required here for states is that they must focus on redress and remedy for those who's also been violated, including full restitution, rehabilitation, and guarantees of non-recurrence, which means stronger rule of law, and of course, building resilience into society. So these are big challenges, big demands, but we have to make sure states actually do live up to them. And to guide states on this, the UNESCO has declared what's called basic principles and guidelines on the right to remedy and reparation of victims of gross violations of international human rights law and serious violations of humanitarian law. Again, these principles stress the importance of restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction guarantees of non-repetition. So how do we pursue? How do we make sure states do that? Of course, if states are in denial, if they refuse to acknowledge this, there are various UN mechanisms that can be resorted to highlight these concerns. I have been, and my colleagues have been raising concerns with various governments about violations of Sikh rights. And we would see that in the aftermath of the 9/11, so the security damage is coming here, there's been a rise in attacks on Sikhs on the mistaken notion that Sikhs look like Muslims are Muslims. So my current report, next report in March, looking at anti-Muslim hatred, will look at attacks on persons because they believe to be Muslim, which of course is often the Sikh community as well. And in terms of what do we do when states refuse to acknowledge their responsibility? Well, examples are there from other countries, Iran, China. People have formed what are called people's tribunals. Obviously, genocide is something only a court can, I think, declare. There have been cases when parliaments have declared this, but I think its authority should come from courts. But people's tribunals have been very effective in documenting violations and making the case that certain type of atrocities require certain types of categorization. This also requires guaranteeing space for civil society to fulfill its role in ensuring that there is space to do this work. And the reason why I think it's so important for us to remember the work of people like, torchbearers like Jaswant Singh Khalra, survivors, champions of his work, is that they do so at great risk to their own life. But when they do so, they make tremendous progress. They have made sure that people who've been, if you like, disappeared will not be forgotten. And it's so important for those who've been harmed that their memory is cherished, that they have solidarity, that their survivors have solidarity, and that we work with them. So as Jaswant Singh Khalra once said, and I quote here, when darkness is trying to overwhelm truth with full strength, then if nothing else, proud Punjab like a lamp is challenging this darkness. So I think, end of quotation, I think that challenging of darkness is so important that we all come together, stand up as torchbearers and light and shed a light on that darkness to ensure that we can see what's going on. Today, I encourage you and join all of you to continue his noble legacy in shining light of truth on human rights violations whenever, wherever, and by whoever's hands they occur, thereby dispelling the darkness for all and everyone. And I will conclude by wishing our American friends here all the best in the next 24 hours and hoping that they'll be able to light a torch and dispel the darkness that have been creeping in some parts of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shahid. Wonderful to hear about the initiatives, especially for minorities around the world when it comes to freedom of religion and belief. We will have Mr. Shahid around, I believe, during question time, when your questions, which may have cropped up as you listen to him speak, can be channeled to us. Those of you who have sent your questions in advance, your questions will also be considered. Esvele, I would like to invite Satnam Singh Bans, who is, as they would say in the education field, a double MA, in this case, a double barrister, in the sense that he is a barrister in the UK as well as practicing as an advocate in India, based in Delhi. Satnam Singh has been a human rights advocate since the days I remember him as a lawyer, and his wife, who's also a lawyer, have worked in the field of human rights, not only in Punjab, but also in the UK and other countries around the world. Satnam Singh Bans is part of an organization called PDAP, which is the Punjab Documentation and Advocacy Project, and also an NGO called Punjab Disappeared. A topic which is so emotional, which has to be dealt with by a lawyer, must be the biggest challenge Satnam Singh Bans, as a Sikh as well as a lawyer, must face every day. And we look forward to hearing from him how has he taken the legacy of Jaswant Singh Khalra. Jaswant Singh Khalra hasn't just left us a legacy, he's left us a duty. Because from reading Gurmeet Kaur's book, where she clearly states that Jaswant Singh was a completer, matlab wo apna kaam sampooran kar de san, someone who believes that if he has started something, it must be finished. Because his life was taken in the way it was, last week was the date that the courts have recognized that his life was taken on the 28th of October in 1995. And therefore, he could not continue to complete his work. And therefore, the duty lies on the shoulders of people like Satnam Singh Bans and everyone else in this room to ensure that Jaswant Singh Khalra's work is completed. So now, without further ado, Vijay Satnam Singh Ji, would you take the stage and tell us what have you been doing that others need to know so that we are empowered to believe that it's all not gloom and doom when it comes to pursuing and dispelling the darkness of injustice.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. First of all, I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me to participate in this event. And also, this event marks the launching of Gurmeet Kaur's book on Jaswant Singh Khalra. Now, I've had a chance to read the book in parts. It was delivered to me. I only managed to get it very recently, but I just wanted to congratulate her on writing a very sort of easy to follow narrative on what is otherwise quite a complex story of how a man in Punjab stood up and exposed to the world that there were these mass state crimes taking place in such a way that the crimes were being committed and then systematically being covered up. So first of all, congratulations, and I really hope that the book is a success in your other events, and it's something that really needed to be done. Before I go on to describe the work that our organization has been doing, I think it's right to really focus on who Jaswant Singh Khalra was. And in fact, his name now is synonymous with the issue of the genocidal massacres, the enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings of thousands of Sikhs between 1984 and sadly 1995, Mr. Khalra being the last victim of the very crimes that he was exposing. Truth is perhaps one of the most powerful weapons, and Mr. Khalra understood and recognized that when truth is brought to light in the way that he exposed, it has a very powerful impact. And what I mean by that is that we live in an age now where there is a lot of focus on fake news, and I'm sorry, there's just a bit of disturbance. 1 second. I'm sorry, there's just a bit of repetition in the room. Jaswant Singh Khalra recognized that the only way in which these mass state crimes can be brought to the world's attention is through the collection and dissemination of data. Jaswant Singh Khalra, 15 years before we had this phenomenon of WikiLeaks, and if you remember when Julian Assange's organization had exposed how Western governments were resorting to, a variety of shocking measures and tactics in suppressing dissent, all the way up to extrajudicial killings, which were taking place in Afghanistan and other conflict zones post 9/11. And one of the most powerful things that came out of the whole WikiLeaks episode is how data, when it's exposed in this way, makes us aware as citizens what is taking place in the mountains of Tora Bora or in these far-flung deserts of Iraq and in places like Yemen, where many of these atrocities would never see the light of day. And I use that as a reference point when discussing Jaswant Singh Khalra's work, because Mr. Khalra really exposed something which was an open secret for the people of Punjab, but wasn't really widely known outside of the confines of India. We didn't live in a digitally savvy age in the 80s and 90s. Social media, the internet, none of this existed. And whatever was drip feeding out of Punjab, it was being disseminated in Sikh places of worship, gurdwaras, but it was largely confined there. And it was very difficult because of the Indian government's insistence on not allowing external observers or outside human rights organizations to go into Punjab and really understand what was taking place there. In any conflict where you have mass killings that take place, one inevitable consequence of a mass killing is that there are dead bodies. And one thing that perhaps is quite a poignant reminder of this is it's the 25th anniversary of Jaswant Singh Khalra's disappearance and extrajudicial killing, but it's also the 25th anniversary of the Srebrenica massacre that took place in the former Yugoslavia, where 8,000 Bosnian Muslims were slaughtered. And if we compare what's happened in Punjab to what's happened internationally with other conflict zones where the world's attention has been focused on these mass state crimes, various organizations took it upon themselves after the conflict had subsided to identify what had happened to the remains of these missing persons. And there's been a lot of efforts using modern DNA technologies to exhume bodies from these mass graves that were left after the Srebrenica massacre in order to identify victims, but also to piece together this very complex narrative of what's happened to these people that were executed in cold blood in one of the most horrendous circumstances seen after the Second World War. Jaswant Singh Khalra understood that if the Punjab police were killing people, there must be something that they were doing to the dead bodies. And very ingeniously, when he started investigations, he discovered that depending on which part of Punjab you were from, if the police station was close to a river or tributary, there was a practice of effectively taking a dead body, and the body would be thrown into a river and it would be weighed down. And in fact, some of the evidence that we collated was testimony from police officers who were engaged in this practice, in fact. And we were told that there were various methods and mechanisms to ensure that the body wouldn't resurface in the rivers. One example was that the bodies were kept in these big, large oil drums. And if they were kept in the oil drums before they were thrown into the rivers, the body would saturate with water, so it would make it easier for the body to sink. Other methods that were used, there's an implement that the farming community in Punjab uses. It's called a gandasa. It's a sickle which is used to harvest wheat. The abdomen would be cut open and the intestines would effectively come out. I'm sorry to be graphic, but this is the reality of the topic that we're discussing. And again, the body would be weighed down with rocks, and it was to ensure that the body didn't surface. In some cases it did. The body would flow to other states, and in fact there are newspaper reports of the state of Rajasthan, which borders Punjab, that was complaining about the large number of bodies which were finding their way through the Rajasthan rivers and tributaries, having traveled a considerable distance from Punjab. But the biggest phenomena of body disposal in Punjab was mass cremation. The police would take bodies to municipal cremation grounds in Punjab, and Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra's work principally focused on Patti, Tarantaran and Durgana Mandir, 3 municipal cremation grounds in Punjab, where the Punjab police would take the bodies and the bodies would be cremated as unclaimed and unidentified. Now, what that means is that if a body is found in any circumstances in India and the next of kin can't be identified, then it's the job of the municipal committee to ensure that the cremation is carried out. In order to carry out a cremation, you need to buy things like firewood and cloth. In Punjab and indeed throughout India, the method of any dead body disposal, if they're from the Hindu, Buddhist or Sikh community, is that a cremation is carried out. Muslims and Christians and Jews obviously bury their dead. So the municipal corporation of these various districts in Punjab maintain these registers of unclaimed, unidentified dead bodies. What Jaswant Singh Khalra managed to figure out was that this was happening on a wide scale, that these weren't just isolated incidents of 1 or 2 dead bodies turning up in these municipal cremation grounds. He in fact uncovered records which showed on any given day there were dozens of dead bodies that were being brought, because the entries in these cremation ground records showed that the unclaimed unidentified body was being brought by a particular police station for cremation. And the interesting phenomena that we certainly had an opportunity to observe was that a lot of these records speak for themselves. So, for example, in any given city in India, there may be a very small, tiny proportion, I would say, of unclaimed, unidentified deaths. And what you would generally tend to find is that maybe if somebody was of a particular age or an illness, their deaths would be recorded as unclaimed, unidentified. But what Jaswant Singh Khalra managed to uncover was that during the late 80s, and the height of these killings, in fact, took place between 1991 and 1993, when the Indian government announced in Punjab a counterinsurgency operation called Operation Rakshak. And it was in 2 phases. There was Operation Rakshak 1 and Operation Rakshak 2, which was resulting in a lot of these young men being forcibly abducted from their homes, illegally detained in police custody, tortured, and then either they died in custody or they were then killed in what were euphemistically described as encounter killings. So the police would claim that these persons who had in fact already been placed in their custody had been picked up from their homes. They weren't engaged in any kind of militant activity at that time. They were taken, tortured, severely interrogated, and if they didn't die in custody, they were taken out of police lockup and then they were shot dead. The police would claim that these people were members of militant organization. They fired on them, they tried to fire back, and these so-called encounters took place when police convoys were fired on. In fact, from the work that we've done in a number of these cases where police officers have faced trial, it's been categorically disproven that these so-called encounters took place. There are a number of features and hallmarks which show that none of the police officers who were engaged in these so-called encounters were ever injured. Their vehicles never had any bullet injuries. The only person who died in these exchanges was the victim. And if the police claimed that the person had been firing and they fired back, then the bodies, the injuries, the bullet injuries on the bodies were consistent with cold-blooded execution-style killings. In some of the post-mortems that were carried out, they show that the person was executed at point-blank range. You know, a revolver would be fired at the temple or in the body parts, the upper chest, which show that these were execution-style killings. From some of the post-mortems and using sort of forensic, you know, ballistic scientific evidence. It can be shown that the person may have been in a crouched position because of the position of the bullet. And we've tried to demonstrate this in courts in India to show that these were people who were effectively being detained and handcuffed, being executed in cold blood, not in the way that the Punjab police had described. So what did Jaswant Singh Khalra do when he uncovered? He managed to procure these records way before India had introduced something called the Right to Information Act. Certain public authorities you can access information from. And in India at that time, and that's not to say that it's particularly easy to obtain any type of information as sensitive as this, but there is a semblance of something similar to what we have in the UK, which is the Freedom of Information Act. He took this information and very bravely and very courageously at that time. And what we have to remember is that these killings, the spike of these killings, were between 1991, 92, 93. And it's 94 that Jaswant Singh Khalra really went public with his findings. So we're talking about 2 years after the peak of killings in Punjab, where these police officers occupied the higher echelons of the Punjab police. KPS Gill, who was the then Director General of Punjab Police, the DGP, was still the DGP of the Punjab Police at that time. It was only after Mr. Khalra's abduction and disappearance and his wife filing this writ petition that these things, then he either resigned or he was moved on from the post because of the outcry. But he challenged these people openly to say that he had direct, strong, tangible evidence to show that these people had been illegally abducted, taken into custody, killed in cold blood. Their bodies hadn't been returned to their loved ones. Even in some of the police reports, it clearly says who the person was, because according to the police version, that these people were militants. Their names were given, their villages were given, the post-mortems even described their caste, their age. All of this sort of plethora of evidence and information was. So he posed a single question: well, how was it that these people who were in the custody of the police, whose identities were known, were cremated as unclaimed and unidentified dead bodies? And the obvious answer to that was because they had been liquidated and eliminated in these ruthless extrajudicial killings. Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra was threatened openly, and the book talks about this, and Gurmeet Kaur has covered this, that he was told that his public estimation of killings, that there were 25,000. The response by SSP Ajit Singh Sandhu, who was one of the most prolific killers in Amritsar and Tarantaran at the time, was that Jaswant Singh Khalra had got his figures wrong. In fact, it was 25,001. And that was an oblique threat to Jaswant Singh Khalra. It was a chilling threat, in fact, that the 2001 victim was Jaswant Singh Khalra himself. Now, there was a period of about 2 months where Jaswant Singh Khalra was openly challenging the Punjab police in the Punjab media. He bravely went abroad, and there were many human rights organizations, WSO and others. He traveled to the UK and to Canada, and they effectively pleaded with him to say that, look, if you go back, your life is in considerable danger. Understanding the consequences and the magnitude of the disclosures that he was making, and the fact that this went right to the top of the tree, as I said, the higher echelons of the Punjab police, he bravely went back. And as we know, sadly, in August 1995, he was abducted from his house. His wife, Paramjit Kaur Khalra, is one of the most phenomenal people that you could ever hope to meet, and I've had the privilege of meeting and working with. She fought a relentless campaign and battle, not just for her husband's disappearance, but she carried the torch of his work that languished and lingered for a period of 17 years before the Supreme Court of India and the National Human Rights Commission, which frankly, it's a topic that requires many, many hours of analysis and deliberation, but I can summarize it in this way. 1,527 people were identified from these illegal cremations. Barely 1% of those cases were investigated by India's premier investigation agency, the CBI, which is the Central Bureau of Investigation. Those trials have been lingering for a period of 25 years. When we became involved in these cases about 8 years ago, we petitioned the High Court to say that these cases have been stayed and stalled under, frankly, ridiculous game playing by the defendants' lawyers, and these trials should proceed. And 4 of those trials had the stays vacated, and I'm happy to say that in those cases, all of them resulted in convictions of Punjab police officers. So these took place between 2018 and last year. There are another 44 cases, but these cases represent the tip of the iceberg. But one thing that was important to bring out in these cases is these judgments, which have taken place in the CBI Special Court, show that there was a clear nexus, because the judgments now prove the thesis, the hypothesis, the submission of Jaswant Singh Khalra, that mass illegal cremations were the result of extrajudicial killings, and that has now been overwhelmingly proved. And in fact, it's Paramjit Kaur Khalra's relentless battle to see the officers convicted in her husband's abduction that went from the trial court to the High Court to the Supreme Court of India. And again, it's because of her tenacity and her determination to see that those officers were convicted that led to those police officers being convicted and those convictions being upheld in the High Court and the Supreme Court of India. And if you look at those judgments, it's clear now, because those judgments in of themselves say that the reason why Jaswant Singh Khalra had been a target of the Punjab police was because of his human rights activism and the things that he'd brought to light. So from a historical perspective, as well as redressing the victim balance, what you have to remember is that minorities and those who are in much smaller numbers often face an overwhelming task to say that the prevailing state narrative that there was terrorism in Punjab and human rights violations didn't take place, or they've been wildly exaggerated by human rights groups. It's almost impossible sometimes to credibly, scientifically, empirically, and through the collection of data counter that narrative because of the circumstances and situation that human rights activists and groups have to operate. So the fact that these judgments, even after a period of 25 years, have now categorically determined that these things have happened, it's opened up a gateway. And that's the gateway that we wanted to find ourselves in, that if in 44 cases charge sheets have been filed, if of those 44 cases, 5 cases have resulted in convictions, then over a period of 10 years, we collated a further 8,257 victims across Punjab. And our, sort of call for justice in this case is to really reiterate what Jaswant Singh Khalra had argued for 25 years ago, that there needs to be an independent, credible commission of inquiry of all enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings, and instances of torture of victims and their families between 1984 and 1995. So by securing these small piecemeal victories, it's strengthened that resolve. It's proved the narrative that was well known by human rights activists and those who've had to operate in this field. The Punjab, in order to move forward, needs to grapple, it needs to grip what took place in Punjab. And India, the size of the country it is and where it occupies itself in the world stage, cannot simply ignore what had taken place in Punjab during that decade of darkness, frankly. If the evidence is there, which it is, we filed voluminous volumes of cremation records, of police first information reports, of post-mortems in a public interest litigation that we initially filed in the Supreme Court of India the year before last. The Supreme Court of India told us to take up the public interest litigation in the Punjab and Haryana High Court, which we did. And this was before the pandemic. And our case was filed, writ petition 270 of 219. And it poses these questions. And in fact, when we filed this case, one of the lawyers remarked that the whole purpose of a PIL is to prompt the court to investigate, not to present the evidence before an investigation has taken place. But it's the experience of the Sikh community and all of those who have suffered in Punjab that even where they have credible allegations, they were never taken seriously. So we actually had to work backwards. We had to prove a case. We had to go much further than, you know, a victim recording a testimony to say that these were the circumstances in which our loved one was picked up, and this is how they had been tortured. We'd seen them in custody. We had to show that there were cremation records that show that there is a date that coincides with the abduction by the same police, which showed there was an illegal, unclaimed, unidentified cremation. There's a post-mortem which shows that the existence of these gunshot wounds is more consistent with an extrajudicial killing. And we've said that for a tiny organization such as ours, we can't do this job. It requires a committed, sincere commission of inquiry, but there is enough evidence that we presented to the Punjab and Haryana High Court to take these steps. So one thing that we've hopefully firmly cemented is that this is an issue that's not going to go away. It can't disappear. Legally, it's impossible because there is a huge volume of evidence which shows what's happened to these missing persons. There are requirements both under Indian domestic law as well as international law that say, let's just take it from a very, you know, sort of at the end of what our litigation is, that there's a dead body. Even the Geneva Convention says that in times of war, there is a duty on two states who are engaged in an armed conflict to return the body of enemy combatants. The body can't be defiled, the body can't be abused in any way, and if it can't be returned to the neighboring country, if there is any attempt to made to cremate or bury the body, it has to be done with respect and dignity. And the question we've posed to the court in India is this, that these weren't enemy combatants, these weren't people from Pakistan or Bangladesh or any country that India has hostilities with. These were citizens of this very country. And the fact that their families and their heirs haven't even had a death certificate means that none of their families can get all of the sort of entitlements that they're entitled to, things like a widow's pension for the widow. The children get subsidies in school if they can prove that their father is no longer there. The fact that these people are in a limbo, in a no man's land, because they are simply known as disappeared persons and they can't prove one way or the other whether they're dead or alive, is frankly unacceptable. So these are some of the issues that we've now petitioned. And again, it's a reiteration of what Jaswant Singh Khalra had asked in 95, that at the very basic human level, when a person is born, when a child is born, it is entitled to a birth certificate. When a person dies, their heirs, their next of kin, their loved ones are entitled to a death certificate. These are the only two certificates that really prove the existence of a human being. So much is placed upon these. So if these people were born in a country, how can it be that they are enforced disappeared? It's completely unacceptable state of affairs. So just to sort of, come to a conclusion on this, I'm all in favor of memorializing certain events. But what I would certainly say is that the Jaswant Singh Khalra story has not come to an end by any means. And in fact, the tragedy of what's taken place in Punjab has not come to an end by any stretch of the imagination at all. There are various bodies and organizations. The UN has an affiliate organization called the International Commission on Missing Persons. They have done various projects to identify victims of Nazi persecution. There were exhumations of graves in Norway. Spain in 2018 set up a commission on war crimes that were committed by the Franco regime. In Colombia, in Cambodia, there is a UN war crimes tribunal that recently convicted a member of Pol Pot's regime for offences that took place back in 1979. In the UK, there is precedent, a very important precedent that was set in the case of Swanjuk, where in 2000, a Nazi concentration camp guard was convicted for offences that took place in 1944, and evidence, victims of the Nazi Holocaust deposed before an English court. So anyone who says, well, these are old issues, the passage of time means that you can't bring prosecutions, there shouldn't be commissions of inquiry, are not in keeping with international jurisprudence. And in fact, the Supreme Court of India, in the case of Manipur, where there were a large number of extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearance that took place between the late 70s and 2012, set up a commission. So we latched our arguments in a similar fashion to say, even under Indian constitutional standards, you've done this for the people of Manipur. In Gujarat, where there was a spate of fake encounter cases, you set up a commission of inquiry. In Bombay, in the late 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, there was a phenomena of the Bombay police liquidating people in fake encounters. Then why is it that the largest number of recorded extrajudicial killings that has taken place throughout the whole of India has not seen a single commission of inquiry? It's unsustainable. So what I would like to sort of really bring to everyone's attention is that these are issues that are not going to be resolved within a day, a week, or a year. At the moment, our teams are still working on the ground in Punjab, despite COVID, despite the pandemic, despite the courts being closed, despite both the Punjab and Haryana High Court and the Supreme Court saying that they're only taking up urgent matters. It makes all of this even more challenging. But one thing I will really reiterate is the struggle for justice has to be kept alive. Whether we get the results that we would like to see or not, that is really secondary. The fact that these witnesses, some of whom are in their late 80s, some of who are in their 90s, we've had situations where we've had to arrange special ambulances or ask the judges to take the testimony at their bedside. It's to ensure that they're given their day in court, so that they are given the opportunity to look their accusers in the eyes, to say, you picked up my son, I can identify you even after 25 years. And this is how, after you had taken my son into custody, you abused me, you tortured me, and those scars that these people bear are still live. If you ever have the opportunity to listen to any of these frankly phenomenal and incredible genocide survivors, they're humbling. So Banji Manjinder Pal was saying, what is it that we can do? We have to stand by each and every one of these victims. And it's not even just about Punjab. If a stand isn't taken, then it could happen to any community in India at any time. And indeed, in pockets, it already has. If anyone says that after 1995, extrajudicial killings, torture, and enforced disappearances have just completely disappeared from India, then you're sadly mistaken. In the last year, just to bring you up to speed with what's going on, Amnesty International has been forced to leave. It's closed its offices in India because of problems that it's faced with its human rights work. Pravina Angar, who is a Kashmiri human rights activist, a woman whose own son was enforced disappeared, and has an organization in Kashmir, in Srinagar, called the Association of Victims families that used to meet every Friday and campaign for the disappeared in Kashmir. Her offices were raided last week. Soni Suri, another phenomenal female human rights activist who's been doing courageous work. She is one of the Jaswant Singh Khalras of India at the present time, a woman who was sexually abused in police lockup, tortured severely, who speaks up on behalf of Adivasi rights, has been crusading for justice and accountability in places like Chhattisgarh. Now, these groups in Manipur and other conflict areas they haven't given up. And to see the determination, tenaciousness, despite all of the problems and the threats that they face, again, it's humbling, it's inspiring, and it's what we should be doing as a community, to say that we owe it to all of those minorities who are struggling to pursue these cases. And then the time to write the history of this is maybe in 20 or 30 years' time, to say that it took the Sikhs of Punjab 50 years to litigate these cases. There is something fundamentally wrong with the system of justice in India that has to change. It's unacceptable that people have to suffer in the way that they are. And, you know, I haven't even touched on the fact that witnesses are often intimidated. We've had to file numerous complaints where those police officers who are retired from the Punjab Police, who still have access to all of the resources within the Punjab Police network, to try and browbeat, to try and intimidate, to try and coerce these family members not to come to court. And our job is to stand completely shoulder to shoulder with them, you know, be what the consequences may, to ensure that they are given their hour, their 2 hours, their 3 hours in court to depose, and to be able to do that freely. So I'll just conclude by saying this, that we shouldn't always measure these things by results. Jaswant Singh Khalra paid the ultimate price. He knew in his heart of hearts, if you speak to his family, he knew his destiny. And he knew the only way that this could be brought to the world's attention was that if he made such a huge sacrifice, which is what he did, he had to become the last victim of the very enforced disappearances that he was exposing, in order for the world to see that this was so brazen that even when a human rights activist stood up and tried to hold the state to account, he himself in broad daylight was abducted, murdered, and then his body was thrown into the Harike River, which was just completely unacceptable, but shows you the level and volume of these human rights violations that were taking place in Punjab. So I'd just like to again conclude by thanking Gurmeet Kaur Panji for a wonderful book. Please, everybody, try and buy it, and it will help you understand more about his life and his background. And please follow the work that we're trying to do. Our website is Punjab Disappeared, and we'll hopefully keep everyone updated on a regular basis in terms of the litigation. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Vaheguru Ji Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Listening to Satnam Singh Ji talk about the work that has carried on since Jaswant Singh Khalra must give a lot of solace to the world, and Jaswant Singh Khalra must be smiling that my work may not yet be complete, but I've left behind lions and lionesses who continue to evade the hunter and continue his work. I now have the opportunity to invite Navkiran Kaur, whose unique role today's meeting is to thank all of you. To thank you because the lamp that Jaswant Singh Khalra famously referred to in his speech in Canada, the little lamps, continue to be lit only because every lamp decided to remain lit. So Navkiran Kaur, who now lives in California, who had gone to the US to pursue her studies, has lived in a family that's a family of shaheeds, is the father, but before that, his grandfather was part of the Ghadar party, and how when in Hong Kong he never returned, the family would not know what were the circumstances in which he lived as an activist of the Ghadar party. The family is also known to be living in the border of Pakistan in a place called Khalra, where not only did the first Guru visit, but that there is a history of sacrifice and strife being experienced for being a border village. I now call upon Kiran Kaur to tell us how was it like to be the daughter of a father we're talking about today, who others have likened to be like Martin Luther King, famous for his speech, a person who not only translated his evidence into a speech, but then actually paid the price for doing so. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I call upon Kiran Kaur.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. First of all, I would like to thank all the participants and the panelists who made it to this event today. Mr. Ahmed Shahid, UN Special Rapporteur on Religion or Belief. I would like to just highlight like my father's last speech in Canada, where he emphasized how important it is for the Sikhs to actually go tell their story about all the human rights abuses that they have been facing, not just to the legal courts, not just to the judicial courts, but to actually go to people's court, to go to the people's court worldwide. And I think this is one of the opportunity we as a Sikh in the entire community, we should always seek for, like wherever it is possible, to connect to whichever organizations which can represent the human rights work that is being done, and to tell our story, our narrative, and not what the government has been telling for a long time. Thank you for sharing all the initiatives that you discussed today. And I really hope that the youth that has connected through this event today would actually get to know these initiatives and actually get involved, because I feel like this is more as a personal belief or as a Sikh, that whenever we identify ourselves as a Sikh, it's like it ethically and morally becomes our duty to be the human rights defender. That's also part of one of the thing that my father said in his speech, that Khalsa was created to be the human rights defenders. And if we are not able to defend our own human rights, then we cannot define what Khalsa is. So wherever in the world we are living in, we definitely need to look around what's going on today in this whole biased societies, and we need to stand up, but we also do need to stand up for our own rights that have been violated for almost 3 to 4 decades by the current regime in India. I would like to thank MP Preet Kaur Gill. I'm really always inspired to see women of color, and especially now a Sikh woman who has made it up all the way to the parliament. And it's a responsibility when you are from a minority group, that it's not just you who reach there, you also create a space for the future, the future minority groups to be on the table, to have the seat on the table and be there. So thank you for being part of this event for today. And then Manjinder Pal Penji for organizing everything. She has been in touch for almost a few months now, and I'm really inspired by how she handles everything, managing all the logistics involved in organizing the event. Satnam Singh Viji, we have been actually I met him very briefly, but we have been in touch through his work, Punjab Disappeared, and recently in the Khalra Week events, I came to know a lot about what he and his wife Jaswant Kaur has been doing. I think they are the true torch bearers. When Jaswant Singh Khalra mentioned that the one lamp can challenge the darkness, and seeing that one lamp, there would be multiple others coming out from different corners of the world. And PDAP, Punjab Disappeared, and INSAF from here based in US. There are multiple other organizations and multiple other lawyers and activists who have been working on the Punjab cases, and they have been doing a tremendous job. I know 25 years for Jaswant Singh Khalra's disappearance, and 36 years when we can just say that it all started, although it started way before that, from 1984. I would say it is a long battle, but normally if we see that to make a monumental change that is positive change in the society, it sometimes takes the entire life. It takes generations to do that. And to have that kind of a commitment, to have a lifetime commitment to a cause, only that can take that cause to a success. So it's a life of a activist, I would say. Never we cannot think or take it as a project which we can finish in a year or a 2 year. It might take the entire life for us to do it, and I'm very thankful for Satnamveer ji to be that torchbearer and to keep doing what he's doing. Lastly, Gurmeet Kaur Penji, thank you for the book that has been written on my father, the biography. I think so far, whatever narrative, whatever stories we have heard has been part of the Indian narrative. And the other thing that I feel is this book was written by considering that how important it is to educate the youth, the children, who are going to be the future torchbearers for any cause of the Panth. And from the contemporary history of the Sikhs, this is, I would say, first initiative which actually is talking about the Sikh heroes. And this is how we want to define our story, and this is how we want to define our history to our future generations. So I really congratulate her for being this first author that could bring out the history in such a easy way, in such a easy to read and follow sequences of the events, where she has written the story of Punjab through the prism, through the lenses, how Jaswant Singh Khalra moved around in it, and how things involved with his life, how things were going on in Punjab. So thank you so much. Then coming on to Manjinderpal Penji's question, being a daughter of Jaswant Singh Khalra, I would say I was 10 years old when my father was abducted. And I've known him more after his abduction, after his Shahidi, than I remember him before that. And it was very early on that the way we were raised, our grandfather, our mother, they kind of raised us with this pride, or with this responsibility, that whatever our father has done was more important than just living a normal life. So I think it was just natural, the way we just got into this whole struggle, and the way and the people we interacted with. We were raised by activists that were not just from our family, but all over Punjab. Even international activists would come visit us. So that inspired us, and that kind of took us through this whole thing. Today, we have an organization, Khalra Mission organization. As soon as my father was abducted in 1995, a few of his friends and close associates and colleagues, they got together to form a small committee called Khalra Action Committee. The main intention of that committee was to actually see through what Jaswant Singh Khalra was working on, what were the cases he was working on, and to do some action activities on those things. But in 1998, when Kuldeep Singh Bachra, the main eyewitness who actually testified that Jaswant Singh Khalra was murdered on the night of October 28th, and that day Khalra Action Committee was changed to Khalra Mission Committee, and eventually in 2005, when the trial court convicted 7 of the police officers, this committee was changed to Khalra Mission Organization. So as an organization, this Khalra Mission has been working as a bridge between those families. I would not call them victim families. We are all survivors because we have been fighting against this injustice even till now. And those families and the legal organizations, the lawyers, the organizations like PDAP and INSAF who have been documenting in Punjab. And I would say after my father's abduction, it's just Vaiguru's kirpa that my mother was able to take up this whole case, and my mother was able to pursue the legal battle, and the entire team of Khalra Mission organization, who even till date have been committed. And for us growing up as a children, I would say when I came to US, my mother sent me here saying that "Tu panth di thi hai, so Panth will take care of you." And I'm really grateful to the Panth. As a family, my brother, my mother, and myself, we think that we have gotten tremendous moral support from the Panth, and there are no regrets. And I would say the legacy of Jaswant Singh Khalra lives through all the Sikhs. And as a Sikh, it is our responsibility that wherever we live and however we live, we have certain responsibilities. There are lot of projects that we can carry on within Sikhi, and as Jaswant Singh Khalra mentioned in his speech, that he is only working on one small project, which is about human rights, and which is about those 25,000 disappeared Sikhs who have been killed extrajudicially, and he's here to talk about that report. And being part of Khalra Mission organization and Khalra family, I would say we stay committed to that same project of the Panth. And I would like that all the Sikhs, especially the youth, to pick your own projects within the Panth. There are a lot of projects, but stick to it and give a lifelong commitment to it. It's not something, Sikhi is not a project you can do in a month or 2 months or a year. You have to give your lifelong commitment to things. And there would be disappointments. There would be in some things where we'll go in Chardi Kala, and sometimes there would be the trials that we have to go through, in which we would have to jo Sikhi di parakh hogi sadi ode vich. But if you're true to the Guru and if you're committed to your cause, you'll get through it. That's all I would like to say. And once again, thank you so much for all the organization, the British Organization of Sikh Students, United Sikhs, All Party Parliamentary Group, Sikh Press Association, and all other organizations who have made this event possible today, and given us the opportunity to get connected virtually. So that's all from my side. Vaiguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaiguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you very much, Navkiran Penji. Mr. Shahid, we would like to invite you to stay 2 more minutes longer, because the book that everyone's been talking about needs to be launched by you. This is the book called The Valiant Jaswant Singh Khalra, written by Gurmeet Kaur. Because of all the arrangements that couriers could not arrange, you did not get a copy of the book. And therefore, we invite Gurmeet Kaur to hold the book out from her studio in, I believe she's in Atlanta right now, whilst we ask you to launch the book. In particular, there is a phrase, rather a paragraph perhaps or less, that Paramjit Kaur Khalra, the wife of Jaswant Singh Khalra, has been quoted in her book. Penji Gurmeet, do you have that text to hand? Because I couldn't get my fingers on it myself. I'm not also in a place where the book was available. So if that's possible, otherwise, listening to everything we've heard between what Mr. Shahid said, Satnam Singh has highlighted, and Kiran Kaur has thanked us for, the important thing is on this event, which had at one time 94 participants, they have taken away with them a very beautiful insight into what the United Nations Special Rapporteur could do, into what Satnam Singh has done and continues to do and wants others to do, so that the lamp that was lit, the lions and lionesses left behind, continue to evade the hunter, so that one day the hunter will be defeated. Mr. Shahid, with a few words, if you could launch the book.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor and privilege to launch this very important book, The Valiant by Gurmeet Kaur today, about a very inspiring personality from whom all of us should draw inspiration, courage, and of course, guidance the work we do. It will serve as a very fitting tribute. It's a very quiet yet defiant statement, reminding his cruel abductors that they could take his body away, maybe his life, but not his spirit, and not the light that he spoke about. And I think it's so important to keep reminding everybody of his valiant work, of his great work, to younger generations, to inspire them to do similar sort of work, because the work goes on. It's a tall task. But also, one of the most important things it does is to those Sikh communities back in Punjab, remind them or to tell them of the great work done and give them hope of what can come, but also of those in diaspora community of the importance of energizing the consciousness about the identity of Sikhs, about the rights of Sikh community, and of the potential there is of working to have those rights delivered, and then have this storytelling as a way to energize all of us. So I also want to thank and pay tribute to the author, Gurmeet Kaur, for undertaking this monumental task and for producing such a fantastic book. I had a quick glance through it on a PDF version. I look forward to quietly reading it and giving it to my students as an example of what one can do and what one should try to achieve. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shahid. Mr. Shahid, there are people waiting in the meeting room to ask you a question or two. I really don't know whether we can prevail on you on that, but if Jasveerji, you are able to give the one question. The reason we invited you, Mr. Shahid, is the community needs to have these connections with the United Nations. We are a nation without a state, but we are a state nevertheless for which we have needs. And Jasveer, do you have a question if you had to put from the various questions that you had received that Mr. Shahid could handle?
Anji, firstly, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you all for having me. It's an honor to be included in such an event and to be able to speak with such esteemed speakers today. Mr. Ahmed Shahid, there's been actually various questions, so it's really hard to kind of narrow down what we can ask, but I'll get straight to it. So an important one to ask is one which coincides with the timing of this week, which is Sikh Genocide Awareness Week, where countless Sikhs around the world are remembering the period 36 years ago when tens of thousands of Sikhs were victims of the Indian state perpetrated Sikh genocide. You've mentioned before, and so did the speaker Satnam Singh, that the UN has prosecuted people before for war crimes. So a question from Rajinder Singh Sarai: what can we do, the Sikh community, to get Indian genocide perpetrators before an international criminal court?
Okay, I'll take that one, but also can you add one more so I can give combined answers to two questions, if that's okay?
Yeah, no problem. So another important question again coincides with the timing right now. So tomorrow is the third year, tomorrow will mark the third year that a British Sikh political prisoner has been imprisoned in India. So far, he hasn't been formally charged with anything. He's documented his torture at the hands of Punjab police, and no evidence has been presented against him in court, allowing his defense an opportunity to defend him. That person is, of course, Jagtar Singh Johal, the person behind the Free Jaggi Now campaign. So in regards to his situation, what can the UN do, if anything at all, to speed up the process where he's being detained without even being charged and without any evidence being presented against him in court?
Great, thank you. In the second case, I wrote to the government of India, along with a couple other colleagues of mine, late last year, raising serious concerns about his treatment, his detention, and of course, the situation that was there. So I think what we can do is follow up with it with a more public, if you like, exchange on that, because the last communication was a confidential one to the government directly, but then of course made public later on. So it goes off the radar almost. And then, of course, there was no reply from the government. So I think it's good for us to take it up again in a more public fashion, perhaps. So there can be, I think, a more, if you like, public accounting for what was happening to him. Certainly, awareness raising about his situation is something we can do and we will do. And if you can give me more updates at the present time, it will help me formulate a response to that situation. With regard to criminal accountability for what happened in India, I think we have to go step by step. Like I said, there are ways to build up the pressure, build up the awareness on the situation. India's response to my last report just a few weeks back was that we are the world's biggest democracy, as if that should silence all criticism of anything. That may be the case, but then all governments have serious issues, and when there are serious issues, we must hold them to account. So first of all, there are low-level UN mechanisms that work a bit more, if you like, quietly, like the working group on enforced disappearance, working group on detention, summer executions. All of these groups can be engaged to build up the case. From there on, you go one notch up to the next level. It would be really difficult to have a special mechanism at the UN set up for India, for the same reason as China would also be in the same situation, would block it, given India's, if you like, clout in world politics. But that should not stop the mechanisms that are already there in building up pressure and building and they do something. So I would recommend you begin with the special procedures mandate holders, and then just start building pressure from there, and see also they can set up a people's tribunal which can document. You'll have esteemed judges, retired judges, or judges are doing this. So you have a proper legal process, but it's not a formal court, but creates the documentation and the case legal base necessary for further action. And of course, if you look at the case of Iran or elsewhere, it takes years to get somewhere, but India is in Iran. I think the level of impunity India can sustain is more limited than what Iran is doing. So I think by building up more pressure through these means, you create a pressure for others to respond as well. You will notice that India is losing its world status, as it were. If you look at the US Commission of Religious Freedom, whose report which came out in April this year, for the first time listed India as a country of concern for them, which means that people are taking notice of the kinds of violations that are going on there. Of course, India is in Pakistan yet in this situation, but the kind of issues we face in India are becoming more and more. And I had this year, again, followed up on other issues of Sikh communities, recording a pattern of violation against Sikh minority in India. Arbitrary detention, torture and custody, and of course, specific cases where there have been long-running issues with the government of India. So I think systematically, methodically follow these steps, and also at the same time, develop networks of solidarity with other communities, because a number of other minority communities also raising same concern about impunity. Working together, we can create a stronger ripple that can become something more significant. So I would advise going step by step and keeping forward, and think about a people's tribunal that can really create more attention on the issues that are involved here. Thank you very much for that question, and also for giving me time. I have another commitment at my university, in fact, so I need to be leaving shortly. Thank you very much.
So thank you for those answers. Majinder Palpanji, I'm not sure if we have the opportunity to perhaps ask any questions of our previous speakers. I know we're running a bit over time, or if not, then we can proceed.
Yes, I was actually hoping that Mr. Shahid would be able to hear from Gurmeet Kaur about why she chose to write the book. I think Mr. Shahid has left, if I'm not correct. At this juncture, I would think, since the flow is in the book, we will invite Gurmeet Kaur to tell us, why did she write this book? I know she's been missing in my social calendar. She would say things like, Penji, I'm doing a very exciting project. And I would think that, yes, it must be exciting, but didn't realize what she really was up to. She was beavering away the amount of research that has gone into this book. Gurmeet Kaur is a software engineer in her previous preoccupation with her life. Today, not only is she a mother of two, but also a writer of books for more mothers when she writes books for children. And this particular book, The Valiant Jaswant Singh Khalra, was written with a 12-year-old and upwards in mind, so that the issues, which can be quite, I wouldn't say dry, but complex, and sometimes get very academic, and therefore do not appeal to the children. Like, for example, We had the case of, Martin Luther King being known in history as a great speaker. Panji has brought this into the fold of the younger generation. So Panji, without further ado, could you tell us, why did you write this book?
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So first of all, thank you everyone to come together, and Benji Majinder Pal Kaur for taking me seriously when I said I have done my job, now it's your job. Thank you so much. And I'm in gratitude that this book allowed all of us to come together on the same platform. So today, it's November the 3rd, 2020. Exactly 36 years ago, in the year 1984, I was a young girl of 15 years. I was surrounded by an angry mob who had set our home on fire. And I was desperately trying to escape with my parents and younger siblings in a city called Indore, located in the center of India, far away from Punjab. After the political assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, her party vowed a revenge with the blood of Sikhs in India. The state machinery set out to a carefully orchestrated plan, mobilized its volunteers to burn, loot, kill, and rape in every part of the country. Rest of the nation, except a few good Samaritans, joined their hands, no matter their political affiliation. After facing 3 days of terror, arson, and assault, we somehow escaped the hands of the mob, all 5 of us running in different directions. We had barely made it alive, but my 3 cousins were not so lucky. In the northern city of Kanpur, all of them in their 20s were burnt alive in front of their widowed mother. One in front of his wife and a 2-year-old daughter. Such was the case with thousands upon thousands of other Sikhs throughout every major city and town of the country. Their dead bodies were hauled away in garbage trucks and secretly disposed of. They did not even make the official figures of the pogroms that the media later reported as natural reaction of the nation upon the political assassination of their beloved Prime Minister by her Sikh bodyguards, while propagating them as Delhi riots. For 36 years, my generation has been living with the oozing wounds of 1984 that will never heal. Yet, we did not have the heart to tell our tales to our children. How could we? The tales were too gory, too cruel for a child's heart. And for years, we were made to believe that somehow we ourselves were responsible for this carnage. There has not been one single book about 1984 that would have educated our children about the recent past. For years, I have been fearing what happens when my generation is gone, carrying our wounds alone without telling our children what really happened. That is why I wrote this book. Post-1984 and until the mid-1990s, disgruntled by the June and November genocide, Punjab entered a period of civil unrest in its quest for sovereignty. Backed by the government, the Punjab police and national security forces went on a killing spree to curb the insurgency. Along with the armed militants, the police also picked up their innocent families, neighbors, sometimes all the young men of the entire village they belonged to, their aging mothers and their fathers, their wives and their sisters, unlawfully detaining them, torturing and killing them in faked encounters, and secretly disposing of their bodies, just as they did in the June and the November pogroms of 1984. But this time, one man was determined and destined to end this business of secretly disposing of the dead, and set out to unearth the enormity of the genocide by collecting the evidence of the crime in order to bring the truth to the world, in order to stop it. He gave his life in search of the lost sons and daughters of Punjab, 25,000 of them, Hence, his story is not his alone. It is that of all disappeared men and women of Punjab who were denied not only a right to live, but a right to their last rites, who were denied the right to be counted, whose stories we never told our children. It has been 25 years that Jaswant Singh's extrajudicial murder brought human rights abuses against Sikhs to the light of the world. And in these 25 years, we have almost started to forget him. The work he had started is almost at standstill, since a few efforts that you heard about. While an entire generation is gone, the eyewitnesses are dying off, the proofs are being destroyed, documents from the crematoria where the mass cremations took place are being sealed. After the genocide, the government is banking on the memory side of our people. But we won't let that happen, would we? We will pass on the story of the 20th century Punjab to our children. And that is why I wrote this book. Our children have grown up embracing and loving their neighbors, have learned from civil rights leaders and human rights defenders from around the world. They stand up for Black Lives Matter in the USA and the Indigenous lives in Canada. They stand up for the violation of the Kashmiri rights and Dalit lives in India. Yet they don't know how badly they themselves have been wronged and that they need to stand up for their rights as well. They need to be inspired by their own heroes like Jaswant Singh, who spent his life standing up for others, the laborers, the peasants, the poor, the Hindus and the Muslims. When it came to standing up for his own, he did exactly that too, and with all his might, while teaching us that Khalsa was formed to defend the human rights of all. But if you cannot defend your own rights, you will not be able to define Khalsa to the world. So our children can learn from our own heroes about their own past and chalk out a plan for their future. That is why I wrote this book. But why did I write the book for children, you may ask? I believe that if we don't educate them through our stories when they are young, they will most likely shun the topic when they are older and be content in believing what they have been fed via the state-sponsored propaganda on the internet. I have seen this happen with my own generation, even in my own family, who went through the same experiences that I did. Teaching history to the children provides them with a sense of identity. It improves their decision-making and judgment and shows them models of good and responsible citizenship. It also teaches them on how to learn from the mistakes of others. It helps them to understand change and development. History provides them a context from which to understand themselves and others. I refer to this Native American saying often, "You don't know where you're going until you know where you're coming from." Without teaching them the 20th century history, how do we expect them to shape the 21st century? But since this book is for children, it has to be engaging and stimulating and be full of good moral examples for them to follow. And that is where our hero and his thinking at every phase of his life comes into play, as a role model for our children to follow, even when he was as little as the age group I wrote this book for. The book is structured so that the heartwarming story of our hero interweaves with the threads of the history of the 20th century Punjab that he lived and interacted with, including the events that led up to the 1984 genocide and post-1984 disappearances. The book goes a little back and takes the readers on an interesting journey on Kamagatamaru, the ship on which Jaswant Singh's grandfather, along with his 376 Punjabi co-passengers, was denied entry into Canada in guise of exclusionary laws, the incidents that later led to the reforms in the country's immigration laws. It takes them to the Ghadar movement, initiated by the Punjabis for the independence of India from the British, to which his grandfather dedicated his entire life. through the price they paid for the Indian independence, the devastating 1947 partition of Punjab that took 1 million lives and was witnessed by his family being on the border of India and Pakistan, it takes the readers to the contribution and sacrifices of the Sikhs in the two Indo-Pak wars, from Jaswant's childhood and then into the Punjabi Suba movement that ended in 1966 with the truncation of Punjab yet again, when he was merely 14 years of age. It takes them through the national emergency of 1975 imposed by the dictatorial regime of Indira Gandhi to the Anandpur Sahib resolution that sought the lost rights pertaining to the land and waters, the economy and the language of the people of Punjab, along with the rights to practice the Sikh faith without interference, the asking of which painted them as a communal and an anti-national community. It discusses in details Jaswant Singh's views on the resolution and the philosophy behind his views. It takes them through the provocation of 1978 that led the Sikhs to take up arms against the government, to the massacres of 1984, leading up to the mass disappearances and illegal cremations until 1995, until Jaswant Singh's own disappearance. To make it attractive and interactive, the book is richly illustrated, heavily supplemented with historical pictures and documents and newspaper clippings from around the world, so the words don't feel heavy and the youth lives the history, feels it, imagines it, empathizes with it, and finally owns it. So that the youth from Punjab and outside of Punjab can't help but shoulder the responsibility for shaping our future. That is why I wrote this book. I wrote it in both Punjabi and English languages so our children in the diaspora and the ones in Punjab can understand, join hands, and shape our future together. This is not only the story of Jaswant Singh, but also that of his father Kartar Singh, who lost his father to free the same country whose free government would then kill his son so cruelly. Ironically, both of Kartar Singh's fathers and the son's bodies didn't come home for their last rites. And Kartar Singh's story is the story of many thousand Punjabis, losing a parent to 1947 and a child to 1984 and beyond. But this is also the story of our women, like Jaswant Singh Khalra's mother, Mukhtiar Kaur, who became the proverbial 25,001st woman or mother whose son was picked up by the police in broad daylight, tortured to death, his body disposed of, while she awaited his return with eyes glued to doorsteps until her last breath. This is also the story of his wife Paramjeet Kaur, who picked up the torch after her husband and best friend and walked a very long and hard road with two little children to fend for, not giving an inch in the face of threats, greed, manipulations, and personal grief. She fought not only to get justice for her husband's murder, but along with the families of close to 3,000 disappeared in the district of Amritsar, the ones that Jaswant Singh had uncovered in his investigations. This is also the story of hundreds of young and old Sikh women who were picked up, tortured, and killed the same way as their men counterparts. Those we have completely written off from our narratives. Those who suffered in isolation, shame, and grief, and yet gathered all they had and faced life head on. This is also the story of the daughters of our heroes, like Navkiran Kaur, who bravely carries the legacy to the next generation and helped me write this book. So our daughters can be inspired to see the struggle as their own and own up to the leadership of the people along with our sons. That is why I wrote this book. As I thank everyone who has helped create this piece of history, the first ever illustrated biography of this cadre, written for our youth, I ask each one of you present here to be a part of this milestone. I have brought it to your lap. Please take it on to all the young people you can. All the proceeds go back into making this book widely available, You can get more information or connect to this book on our website, www.pippal.org. Our history, our struggle, our future lies in your hands in these 225 pages. Please take the torch in your hands and pass it on. Thank you so much. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. You can see that Panji Gurmeet Kaur is an activist first and a writer next. She became a writer because of activism. It is the teachings of the Sikh Guru. Then one must not only think about it, speak about it, but actually act on it. And she has acted on it. I would like her, because it's an exciting book that very few people have their hands on. If you have a packet open, could you flick us through the pages, because we would like to thank Inquisitive, your artist, who illustrated the book, which will be the point at which everyone will say that this is something that we should admire, both artistically, as famously Rajwinder Singh Bands of Punjab had said that this is a work of art. So as you can see, children will be able to relate to it. I, despite my not having much time, went through a single sitting of reading this book up to page 100, after which I've not been able to return to it, and I will first thing tomorrow, I think, but really well illustrated. I would say if you wanted to sit your child down to tell them who his parents and grandparents were, this book will do it for you. At this point, we are in this position of awaiting to hear from Jaswant Singh Khalra's brother, Rajinder Singh. But to be fair to the trend of the questions that have been going, and Satnam Singh is here to answer some of the questions. Jasveer, could you preempt the intervening talk from Rajinder Singh with some questions?
Hanji, no problem. Are we looking to address questions towards previous speakers? I can't,
yes,
I think you can tell me.
Yes, if you could address Satnam Singh's questions first, because then people will get the idea of what he had said before we go into the generality of the questions.
No problem. I'm just going through some of the questions that have been asked towards us. Firstly, I think I'll direct a question, and many have come in for Nav Kiran Panji. So from what you know from your family, what kind of person was Jaswant Singh Khalra, and what was driving him in his efforts to do this work for the Panth?
Thanks for the question. I think I was very young. As I said, like there were a lot of activists who used to visit our house, and one of my father's, you can say, mentor, Dalbir Singh Pattarkar, he has been with Sant Jarnail Singh also during his time when he was a journalist. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਸਵਾਲ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ what do you think ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਪਾਪਾ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਆ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹ ਇੰਨਾ ਵੱਡਾ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਹੋਇਆ, and then I was like a teenager. I was like ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਕੰਮ ਨੂੰ ਸਲਾਹ ਰਹੀ, and it is a milestone, right? And he was like, nah, he just did what a Sikh should have done. So jo ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੀਤਾ ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਸਿੰਪਲ ਜੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਫਿਲਾਸਫੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਬਾਬਰ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਬਰ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਜਾਂ ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਨਾਰਾ ਮਾਰਨਾ, ਇੱਕ ਸਿੰਪਲ ਜੀ ਫਿਲਾਸਫੀ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ he worked, and that's what he did. And it is ਸਾਨੂੰ like all of us being Sikhs, we need to introspect ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹੀ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਵੱਡੀਆਂ ਲੱਗਣ ਲੱਗ ਗਈਆਂ ਜੋ ਇੱਕ simple philosophy ਸਾਡੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਸੀ, then we need to work on it. So I feel like what my father did was true to his Sikhi roots, ਜੋ ਉਹ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, and the legacy that our gurus had created for us. And I think all we should pray is ਅਰਦਾਸ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕਰਨੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ we should also be true to our guru, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ commitment ਸਾਡੇ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੈ, ਸਾਡੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੈ.
Thank you, Panji. For Satnam Singh, two questions that I'll throw at you. So firstly, very simply, why is India not made to conform to international law when it comes to human rights? And to include with that, could you tell us the latest status of your work in bringing issues of defacing encounters, massacres to court through people's tribunals and other.
Okay, so just to deal with the first point, why doesn't India comply with international law? There are certain basic standards that every state should adopt, and I'll just give you 3 examples. One is there's an international convention against torture, CAT, which India is a signatory to, but it hasn't ratified. The Convention Against Torture hasn't been ratified into Indian domestic law. And the third important convention is the Convention Against Enforced Disappearances, which again, India hasn't enshrined into its domestic legislation. Most Indian laws were put into place by the British. The Indian Penal Code dates back to the 1800s. And if you look how these laws were used by the British, you know, just to sort of take a tangential point, for example, offences of treason, waging war against the state, sedition, are the most widely misused laws in India. The Sikhs have borne the brunt of those. They continue to, as do many other marginalized groups, and even political groups often find themselves on the receiving end of that. There needs to be a consensus, and there needs to be a wider awakening that if you are a civilized state, if you are the proclaimed world's largest democracy, then it's as simple and straightforward as this. You should have a law that prohibits and prosecutes torture. In all the cases that we've done, you can either prove a murder, an attempted murder, or an abduction or a kidnapping, but nowhere in the charge sheet is there an offence of torture, even though the evidence is so obvious from victims that they were tortured. Similarly, the maximum penalty that can be given for an offence of abduction with intent to murder, which is often the charge that's laid, the maximum is life, but often the judges award 10 years because there isn't an offence of an enforced disappearance. So the reality of the situation is this: India can't be forced to ratify and enshrine into domestic legislation, but if it's a country that wants to operate on the world stage, then as a very basic minimum, the citizens of India are entitled not to be tortured, enforced disappeared, and any community. And, you know, if you see the development of international law after 1947, it stems from the events of Nazi Germany and the extermination of 6 million Jews. The world came together to say that this should never happen again. The Holocaust shouldn't happen. And the irony for India is, in 1947, the UN came into being. In 1947, we saw one of the massive, you know, sort of genocides of various communities, the 1 million people during partition. So whilst the world's focus was really on what was happening in Western Europe, everybody lost the ball. Or took their eye off the ball, I should say, in terms of what was happening in that very troubled region of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. You know, there's never been any discussion in India or Pakistan or Bangladesh to say these nations were born out of bloodshed and genocide and ethnic cleansing and all these terms that have now become sort of common in international criminal jurisprudence. But the reality is, unless there's enough pressure made both within India and internationally to say, give me one good compelling reason why a country shouldn't have a law that prohibits torture, there isn't any. Give me one compelling reasoned argument why a state should say that there shouldn't be a scope to prosecute crimes against humanity. And if we take this further, India isn't a member of the International Criminal Court, and this is a discussion that I have with a lot of activists in India, that there isn't anything to fear, that if your human rights record isn't that bad, or you haven't asked your security personnel to engage in these acts, then why not join or create an awareness within India to say that to safeguard minorities, and to ensure that politicians don't engage in the kind of acts that were carried out in '84 and in 2002 in Gujarat, and very recently during the last election. That is a sort of it's a bulwark against those sorts of things. So it requires, and it comes back to the point that I was making earlier, it may take many years to get to the position that you have to compel a state to follow this. And they want you to sort of sit back and say, well, it's hopeless, the Indians aren't going to do this. The only way you can do it is, showing solidarity with the groups that are facing this at the moment, both in Punjab and outside of Punjab, but also presenting these compelling arguments to say that there isn't any excuse not to protect your own citizens. And sorry, could you just repeat the second question? Sorry, I can't hear. Sorry, I didn't.
Thank you. Sorry, yeah, I had to wait for somebody to unmute me. Yeah, the second question was if you could update us on the status of your work in India and Punjab specifically right now with taking to court the issue of the fake encounters massacres.
So we filed a public interest litigation of 8,257 victims across Punjab. We filed that case last year, and we've had 2 hearings on the case. The update from the last hearing was that the Chief Justice of the Punjab and Haryana High Court, who is presiding over the public interest bench, has asked the state of Punjab, in fact, the Attorney General was asked, that all of these things that we presented in terms of what happened in the Jaswant Singh Khalra litigation, these are things that we say have now set a legal precedent that a body was cremated illegally. It means the person's entitled to have the perpetrators investigated and criminal proceedings to take place against the perpetrators, and they are entitled to compensation for the illegal killing and not for the body to not be returned. So we've given them a huge volume of material. So the last effective hearing we had before the lockdown, and in March India went into lockdown, was a direction to the Attorney General to provide the Punjab and Haryana High Court with those relevant orders from the Jaswant Singh Khalra case. Since March, we haven't had any significant process, and a lot of that is down to the fact that the courts are not listening or listing a large number of cases, so they're sort of operating in a skeletal way. Lower courts, where many of our trials are taking place, are not allowing witnesses to come to court. So, I mean, to some extent, it's a situation that's affecting a lot of courts, internationally. But what we are very guarded against is now any attempt to sort of delay or string out what is a very old case, and there is an urgency for this issue now to be litigated. So the matter's now listed in December. I think it's the 12th of December that it's been listed for, and we'll have to see if that's an effective date, or whether, depending on what the lockdown situation is in Punjab at that time, whether we get another date into next year. But what we must do is, what we're trying to do is raise awareness and to, again, maintain the pressure on the courts to say that this is an important and live issue for the people of Punjab.
Thank you, Virji. Do we have time for any more questions?
Yes, we can have one question. Just can we have one question from Satnam Singh? Anyone who wants to know what it takes to live in India and manage his profession, at the same time manage his passion for what he's doing?
I think that's a very good question. I think especially relevant concerning what we all know happened tragically to Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra. So yeah, if you could answer, what is it like for you to do that work in India right now?
I mean, look, it's challenging work. There's no denying it's challenging, it's difficult. Sometimes it can be frustrating and soul destroying. But I guess, there is just that inspiration that we take. And these families have been struggling now for 25 years. And, to stand with them and just to do, whatever small minuscule amount of work that we can do is I guess what keeps us going. You know, it's a constant juggling act, you know, in terms of what you've got to do with your professional practice and your commitment to this issue. But, you know, that comes with the territory. So there are many other people that are involved, Jagjit Singh Advocate, Baljinder Singh, Jaswant Kaur. We have a good team of people that are all committed to this. So, you know, and Bibi Paramjit Kaur Khalra, who is our spiritual, you know, figurehead, I suppose you could say now. And we've just got to keep it going.
Thank you, Ji.
If I may just at this stage inquire if Rajinder Singh, who is the brother of Jaswant Singh Khalra, is still with us, because we would love to hear from a person what it was like growing up with a person who went on to now chart the way forward for Sikh human rights. All of us as Sikhs are human rights activists, but when someone charts a path like he did, there must be something genetic about it. There must be something to do with the family that we can then nurture in our families to make sure it happens there. I'm waiting to hear about that, but in the interim, may I make some announcements on behalf of the organizers? First of all, I'd like to thank my co-organizers, that's British Organization of Sikh Students, BOSS, very emphatically, as well as Sikh PA as our media partner. But more importantly, all of you right now, at one time there were 94 of you sitting to listen to what we had brought to you. And as I'm going through some of the other messages, I find, and some of you may have experienced this in the last few days, that people have been, their pages have been blocked by the likes of Facebook. I don't know about Insta being in the act. And you would recall how #Sikh was banned by Insta in March, and also Facebook. That this phenomenon, which we would have loved to point out to Shahid, Mr. Shahid, which we will do after this meeting. We would like all of you who are experiencing this. We have Gurdwaras pages being not able to publish. People like Guru Nanak Gurdwara Smethwick, people like the Guru Nanak Darbar Gurdwara in Gravesend were facing difficulties. I don't know whether they still are. So it's like every Sikh is being asked to account for their history. They are being banned because they're writing about the Shahidi smargams that are going on this period of time, and any reference to Shaheeds or certain names that are being picked up by the social media platforms are causing this banning of the pages. I now wait to hear from Preet Panji. I'm told that my headphones are giving. Try my natural voice. If this is any better, please do let me know. What we want to announce as a group is that what we started today was a method by which the Panth is updated by its activists. And we bring in subject specialists. And this is the first of the Jaswant Singh Khalra Memorial Lecture. And on behalf of United Sikhs, and I hope my partners would agree, we would like to continue this to be an annual event in about the same time of the year when Jaswant Singh Khalra disappeared and then was killed, so that we might be able to tie it up with this period when in the month of December is Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib Ji's Shahidi. So we have a lot to talk about, but how every year we could have a different theme. This year the theme was disappearances, for the appropriate reason that it was Jaswant Singh Ji's 25th anniversary. Next year it might still well be the farmers in strife, and there might be a subject specialist we would like to bring into, so that the Panth gets updated about its work. I need you to be able to share the YouTube links to this video with anyone else who did not watch it. And if you think you want to have others benefit from how you did, this is where you can help. And I don't know if we could wait any longer for Rajinder Singh, because we are about 30 minutes over the time limit. And especially for Satnam Singh Ji, it is quite late in the morning, early in the morning for you. If I get a cue from my colleagues, he's joining in 2 minutes. His link is not good. And Dabinderjeet Singh, if you're still online, would you be able to tell us how the Panth, which does a lot of good work, is not able to communicate its good work, as the result of which we don't empower each other. With listening to Satnam Singh today, I'm sure tons of you feel, I wish I was there in Punjab doing this work. He actually went there. A lot of us aspire to be there. When we start listening to people who actually take the step to go to these places, where, as Jaswant Singh Khalra did when he went home, and take the risks that come with it, that's what Guru Sahib meant, that I give no fear and receive no fear. So Dabinderjeet Singh, what do you think we could do to encourage such exchange of information within the Panth?
Benji, I wasn't expecting to talk, and so I hadn't even put my camera on. I think when I first heard, you know, everyone knows what Jaswant Singh Khalra did. He paid the ultimate sacrifice, and he knew it as well. But when he was abroad in the UK, in Canada, he very much knew that his life was in danger. And so when Satnam Singh and Jaswant Kaur, you know, went there, I remember Satnam Singh saying 6 months originally, now it's well over a decade. And to carry on that work of individual lives that have been lost, trying to get some form of justice in India, it's easy to say this in words. I think many of us couldn't do it. We have too many freedoms living abroad. And I think even now we're having this event with people across the globe, and most of us live in countries where we still have freedoms. Yes, we have our Facebooks closed off, but we have lots of other freedoms. And the thing I find with the story of Jaswant Singh Khalra, which this book will clearly help, but I think the masses, i.e. the wider public, the non-Sikhs, still have not heard the story of Jaswant Singh Khalra, the wonderful work that Satnam Singh and the legal team are doing there. And it's how can we help in the diaspora, but at the same time not jeopardize the work that they're doing. I think it's such a fine line, a tightrope, and you know, we're good at creating publicity. I'll be the first one to admit that. But this is an area where you have to bow to the wisdom of the lawyers and what they've been doing. So I think that the battle goes on. Jaswant Singh Khalra started it, and I think it's beholden on all of us to carry that struggle on in whichever way we can. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Waheguru Ji Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I was hoping that Preet Kaur Gill would introduce our next speaker, but I would do that. We have Rajinder Singh, who has his surname as Sandhu. I would rather call it a clan name, but he also comes from Khalra. And he is the brother of Jaswant Singh Khalra. And we asked him if he can recall to us, what is it that he saw in him that then proved who he really was when he went on and did his work. Preet, I would also like to ask you to intervene at some point and tell us, in the Houses of Parliament in the UK, what efforts can be made so that this that we're doing through Zoom could actually go into the corridors of power in the House of Commons and the Lords. So if we could have Rajinder Singh address the Sangat to tell us, I know you've been waiting very patiently, and we thank you for that. We had to change the order of speakers because Mr. Shahid had to leave, and therefore we thank you for being there. But could you let us know, what is it that you want us to take away about your brother?
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. First of all, I want to thank everyone, the hosts, the people who actually contributed as a lecture or on Jaswant's life. And mostly, I want to sort of say thank you very much to Honorable Member of Parliament, Preet Kaur, girl, and her insisting that I shall come and say something. I think most of the work Jaswant has done have been or actually highlighted. I would like to only say about how he was when he was young, what he used to think, how he come to this conclusion or how he achieved it. I don't know if you know about village Khalra. The village Khalra is surrounded by few villages, which is like Pahuvind, like Sursing, like Shina Bidichan, like Wan, Mari Megas. The reason I'm saying is that if you go into the Sikh history, all the greatest martyrs of the Sikhism were actually surrounding the village Khalra. The Khalra was right in the middle. So right from Baba Deep Singh Ji Shaheed, which is Pahuven, Baba Deep Shina Bidhi Chand Ji Shaheed, then Sabeg Singh, and all those Pai Taru Singh Ji from Wah. And I think we were very young, about maybe 10, 11, and he was 2 years younger than me. And I remember once he asked my father that why there's no shaheed, why there's no martyr in Khalra. So when you look at that thinking right from the very early age, the question coming to his mind, why there's no martyr in Khalra? And my father very sort of politely replied that you can only become martyr if you do something for your panth or for the Sikhism or for the cause. Only then you become a martyr. So there is no one actually have done anything like constructive work like that. So he had all these thinking and thoughts right from the day one. And he was very determined. He never ever scared of anything. He will just do everything. And his sort of word was like, there's nothing which is unachievable. And so many other examples I can say, I can tell you, but it's not time at the moment. He said many things. He came to UK, and I think the international campaign started from UK when he came in here. He actually showed that the organizations in UK are not doing the work properly, and they have nothing done in writing, putting in writing to the world organizations, to the governments. So he organized everything here. He organized to write letters to the political parties, to the head of the countries, to the UNO, to the Commonwealth. And that's where actually we started all the work. I know it's very easy or difficult work when you are doing something just in Punjab. That time to fight in Punjab was very, very difficult to even protect yourself. If we take examples of very other martyrs, even the Jathedar Kaunke, who was very important person in the Sikh history, no one could have protected because it was not become international matter. And the UK has played a big part making this case as an international stage. And I think because the work been done in UK has protected the organization and his friends who were working on his behalf in Punjab. So I think those things has, even in the future, if we want to protect someone or protect any movement or human rights, we have to work internationally, because in India, in Punjab, you cannot protect yourself or you cannot protect the weakers. So I think I shouldn't carry on because it's not my stage to say so many things. I would just say, give greetings to the organizers, that well done. The book, I haven't read it, but whatever is in there must be something positive. Even the book is one step forward, a right step, that we must keep memories of all the martyrs, all the good work, and perhaps there will be another books coming soon. I think there is which I'm not sure, I haven't even read about that. There's another book coming, which is written by the Ajmer Singh, who worked with Jaswant in his early age. So his friends contributed in, and that is their first-hand information in that as well. So I think it's nice to have one book released, and then there will be another book, and there will be few more books. And I think all the truth, all the family and every history will come out in the sort of open.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Rajinder Singh. On the point of books, because we were expecting to be able to do a lot of events in the UK, but the COVID situation in the UK has gone into pear-shape, if I may use that word. I have, United States had ordered up to about 400 books, which of course the speakers will get a complimentary copy from the Sangat, because that's how we fund ourselves. And anyone else who wants to avail the book is available through Mighty Khalsa. I don't know the full website address, but offhand, but I'm sure if you go to people.org, you'll be able to find it. And around the world, people.org has listed the venues where the book can be acquired. But do get in touch with me as well, because I've now got 400 books and not many events to organize. Or if anybody wants to organize a book reading where we could use these books, or any other event, let's defeat COVID in the Jaswant Singh Khalra way, by actually going out and taking the bull by its horn, instead of sitting at home and saying that in self-isolation we can't do much. Is Preet Gill available? Because I wanted her to round it off as a host and tell us what is it that she can bring from the Houses of Parliament in the UK to this campaign. And not only this campaign, we now have a burning issue of Sikhs being muzzled in their social media platform voices. I always had this skepticism that we all, love to be liked on social media. One day somebody could just pull the plug and you suddenly forgotten how to even speak to the next person, because you're so used to just doing it on sound bites on Twitter. But we are standing there. Preet, are you available?
I am, yeah. I just want to say I've had to turn my video off just because my link has been quite weak. Just to say thank you so much for a wonderful event. I know it's run over, but we've had some fantastic speakers, and it's just been really inspiring to hear them and the Q&A. What I would say is, it's not going to come to surprise to anyone. Of course, if you want change, you've got to be politically engaged, and it's just not enough to have 2 Sikh MPs. It was great to see Afzal Khan also on this call. He's always been very supportive of the APPG events. There are lots of great MPs who represent huge Sikh constituencies. We have got to absolutely be engaging with our MPs, because how on earth is it that we are going to get the recognition of 1984 being a genocide if we don't put pressure on our MPs to lobby in Parliament? Of course, we have a seat, at the UK mission at the United Nations. That voice is really important. The government hasn't really used this voice to really build kind of pressure and to recognise the plight of Sikhs. And again, the Kisan issue is another issue. Whilst that's impacting lots of places in the world, it's absolutely, again, it's denying the very people the rights of their own land, and farmer suicides has been an ongoing issue. People shouldn't think that parliamentarians are not interested in these issues just because they're international. We are all of these issues mean that we have links in our home country. Back in India, we have family there, and it's absolutely right that we see this government that talks greatly about global Britain actually raising its voice and speaking on behalf of its diaspora. As a community, I think we've been, what's the word I want to use? We've always just been very satisfied with whatever we've had from any government or any, system and process. And we should never, ever, if anything we learn from Jaswant Singh Khalra, it's about challenging the system. It's about speaking out. It's about having a strong voice. And so I urge everybody, do reach out. And if you're struggling, then I would say go via your Gurdwara, call your MPs in and have those discussions, have those wider. I appreciate that language is a barrier. People don't always know how to contact their elected representatives, but actually the Gurukars know how to do it. And it's really important. We don't just give out votes. I say this into myself, hold us to account, make sure we are working for you, because actually that's our role. We're there to serve our communities. So I just want to say thank you. Keep, engage with the APPG. We want to bring events like this. There's a huge amount of interest. Khalra has been a great inspiration to so many of us.
Okay, on that note, a lot of us are waking up to a new day, and some of you are going to go to bed soon, and some are missing your sleep. I would say the battle has just begun is a phrase that we often use, but indeed it has. I'm going off to a meeting right now on Zoom. It's a closed meeting about how we're going to counter this muzzling and censorship of the Sikh voice. Just because you use the name of some shaheeds or refer to some campaigns, your pages get banned. So Satnam Singh, we might knock on your door, though I know you're very, very busy, but there has to be a legal response to this. There are rights out there, but we must go get them. On this note, I thank my colleagues, thank every one of you who stayed, especially the last 47, and we will meet again. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa.